Welcome to Lakers Roundtable. I'm Mark Medina with the LA Times Lakers blog, and I have some really good news. Okay, you're thinking I'm talking about the Lakers' recent two-game winning streak, but this is even better. The Lakers host the Denver Nuggets on the afternoon of New Year's Eve at Staples Center, and to help us preview that game, we bring in someone who arguably has as much of a presence in the city of Denver than Tim Tebow himself. And that, of course, is none other than the Denver Post Nuggets beat writer, Benjamin Hochman. How you doing?
I am like the Jewish Tebow. There's no question about it. Tebow Stein, if you will.
Are people in Denver Hochmaning?
Yeah, that's right. They're screaming out loud while on deadline on the laptop. That's what they're doing.
Wow, it's catching on. I'm glad no students have gotten suspended for doing that, though, in the hallways, have they?
Well, it's early, my friend. It's early. Hochmaning is just catching on.
Hopefully this is the start of a new trend. But, okay, a very important question. I saw the Gallinari music video titled Party Start, Party Stop on the Denver Post blog. Is that now the anthem at Pepsi Center?
I am trying my hardest, Mark, to make this an anthem. If the listeners to this podcast have not heard of the song Party Start, Party Stop, they need to stop what they're doing and go to YouTube right now. It's pretty much the most awesomely bad, awesome song you'll ever hear.
Okay, we'll have them do that once this podcast is over, but it's definitely a must-listen for sure. So, Benjamin, I was reading your tweets at Nugget News. You can follow him on Twitter there at that handle. And one of the interesting ones that you posted the past few days, you stated that you think Denver's depth will help them during this wacky season, that is the 66-game schedule. In what respects do you think?
Well, look, the Nuggets are at least 10 deep. You could argue maybe even 11 or 12 deep. And you look at the Lakers playing back-to-back-to-back Tommy Mansky style. You're going to need the depth. You're going to not need to play your best players 40 minutes a game. It's just not going to work come the playoffs. And no, the Nuggets don't have any superstars. But the fact is they have a good second unit, guys who Coach George Karl is confident with, is comfortable with to play his system, his style of basketball. And it should be fascinating to see if these no-name Nuggets, if you will, can make a push towards the playoffs.
Now, yeah, and I noticed that it seems like George Karl has a man crush on John Hollinger, and in terms of his efficiency ratings and all that, and he had calculated that the Nuggets after Melo have had a scoring margin increased by greater than 10 points. In what respects have they been able to kind of make the best out of a situation losing such a superstar like him?
Well, when you look at Carmelo Anthony, he's definitely one of the best basketball players in the NBA, but is he one of the best basketball winners in the NBA? I still think the jury is out, and he needs more years, more chances to prove us wrong. When you look at the current Denver Nuggets, they're a pass-happy team. They thrive off their defense. They thrive in transition. When they're in transition, they're at their best. Ty Lawson's one of the fastest point guards in the game. And the other thing is George Karl has actually been playing two point guards together often. We saw it in their 18-7 run towards the end of last year when they had Lawson and Raymond Felton on the floor together. And now this year he's been playing Andre Miller and Ty Lawson together. Andre Miller, he's averaging 8.3 assists per game already in just 30 minutes per game. So he's a guy to watch. And I think those are some of the reasons why the Nuggets are 2-1 and reasons why guys like John Hollinger think the Nuggets could finish as high as second in the West.
Where do you see him finishing?
That's a good question. I would say maybe fifth. And I told this to George Karl, and he didn't slap me, so I guess he respects my opinion. Again, you just name the teams: Oklahoma City, Los Angeles, maybe even the Los Angeles Lakers, and maybe even the Los Angeles Clippers. And then I don't know if you throw in the Spurs, or is Dallas really that much worse this year? The way they're playing, the answer is yes. But again, it's so early. Anyway, I think the Nuggets at a dangerous fifth seed, a team that could probably beat the 4 and then maybe rattle the 1. You ask people over at Pepsi Center privately their thoughts about last year's Nuggets post-Carmelo trade, and they'll say that they honestly feel they could have matched up with any team in the Western Conference except for Dallas. Excuse me, except for Oklahoma City. Let me take it a step further. Except for Oklahoma City, and that's who they played in the first round, meaning they feel they could have beat Dallas or even the Lakers in the playoffs. How crazy is that?
That sounds definitely crazy up there, but, I mean, what do you think when you hear that feedback from them?
Well, again, the postseason is all about matchups, and then we saw it last year with your Lakers against the Mavericks, and we saw it even with Memphis and their run through the postseason. Talent is important, matchups are vital, and the way the Nuggets were built heading into that postseason, you could argue that they were set to beat most teams, but that Oklahoma City team and its firepower and its team basketball was just too much for Denver.
Now, we're talking with the Denver Post Nuggets beat writer Benjamin Hochman, and again, you can follow him on Twitter at Nuggets News. And the news from the Lakers then entering this game is obviously the return of Andrew Bynum. He sat out the first 4 games, serving a suspension because of his forearm shove that he delivered to Dallas guard J.J. Barea in the semifinal sweep against Dallas. How do they go about, preparing for that increased frontline depth that the Lakers are going to suddenly have?
Well, it's going to be a really interesting matchup because the Nuggets start Timofey Mozgov at center. And heading into this season, the Nuggets were extremely high on Mozgov, who I refer to as Timofey Mozgov.
Why is that?
Timofey. I also call him Mozzie Mosborn. Mozzie Mosborn is the other one. When you look at this guy, he had a really good fall playing professionally in Russian. Of course, you have to be careful with your analysis of somebody playing overseas because of the talent level. J.R. Smith is one of the best scorers in China, but he's clearly not the same here in the United States. When you look at Mozgov, he's very active, he's very lateral, and he can block a shot here and there. But in the past 3 games, the Nuggets' first 3 games this season, he's been pretty much irrelevant. He's averaging 1.7 points per game and flirting with 2 rebounds per game. That's your starting center in Denver going against a fresh Andrew Bynum. It's going to be very fascinating to see how Coach George Karl and his staff throw different strategies, different players at Bynum, at Gasol. I think that's going to be a key storyline heading into the ballgame.
Another frontline player, Nene, he signed that 5-year contract. I think it's up to $67 million. He posed an interesting question: which Nene will show up during games? How do you see that playing out?
Nene is one of the most mind-boggling players in the NBA because at his best, he's an all-star low-post player. At his worst, he's a detriment to your team. There are times where he gets, I guess, mentally affected, and he will not attack the basket. The play will work, and they'll find Nene in the low post where he's got a good setup against the guy, and Nene will just pass the ball back out. He won't even turn and look at the basket. And that's infuriating to the Nuggets coaches and the Nuggets fans, too. Here's a guy who, down the stretch last year, had some games where he's in the low 20s in the point scoring, and then he had games where he had 8 and 10, including games in the playoffs where he had 8 and 10, and was pretty irrelevant, especially for a guy who commands and is now earning up to $67 million for 5 years. So Nene is one of those guys, and we saw it this year already. The Nuggets had 3 games. 2 of them, he was spectacular. And then in the game against Portland, he made the entire city of Denver roll their eyes simultaneously. So, I guess the question is, the guy's been on the Nuggets since the 2002-2003 season, and for years it was when Nene reaches his potential, when Nene gets to be the guy he's supposed to be. Well, now we're heading into 2012. Is it possible we know who Nene is going to be, a sometimes dominant, sometimes inconsistent big man? The Nuggets hope it's more of the former, but I'm afraid that's just the analysis.
Well, that being said, I mean, obviously the Nuggets have lost Kenyon Martin. How do they go about replacing just what he provided on defense?
That's a great point, and one I think the casual fan overlooks when you look at this Nuggets team. Kenyon Martin was a guy who adored to defend the big men on the other team, and even the small forwards and the shooting guards, and occasionally he'd end up on Steve Nash or Tony Parker at the point guard position. Here's a guy who plays contagious defense, who is kind of a quarterback of the defense, if you will, and he's not on the Nuggets this year, so obviously you can't replace that. But then you go back to who the Nuggets hope will provide more defensive strength, and that's Nene. George Karl told me, he goes, that's the guy I want to be playing more of the A defensive role and not the B defensive role, and it remains to be seen just how effective Nene will be.
So you mentioned earlier Ty Lawson and Andre Miller have been sharing backcourt duties. You look at the Lakers roster with Derek Fisher and Steve Blake. How do they go about just making sure they take advantage of that? Because out here, they're not exactly known as having the quickest feet out there.
Yeah. When you look at the two guys in Denver, Lawson and Miller, they're at their best when they dribble, penetrate, and dish. And the Nuggets, about 50% of their offense is based on an offense called the dribble drive motion. I don't know if the Lakers fans are familiar with it, but basically its principles came up from a guy named Vance Wahlberg, who was a California guy, used to be a high school coach up in Fresno and even coached Pepperdine for a few years. And he's considered an innovator among basketball circles for this dribble drive offense, where instead of guys just doing the Carmelo Anthony and dribble in one place, and as George Karl calls it, killing grass, this offense is based on constant motion, constant dribble penetration, and moving the big man to the far block, not the near block, so basically just creating space for the penetrator. And then the Nuggets, like I said, do that in about 50% of their offensive sets, so it'll be very exciting from a Nuggets standpoint to see Lawson and Miller go against what you kind of referred to as maybe slower-footed point guards.
So, given the fact that the Nuggets are going to be playing the Lakers on a back-to-back, they're playing New Year's Eve afternoon. I'm not quite sure how you say that properly, but they're playing the afternoon of New Year's Eve at Staples Center. Then they quickly come back to Denver to host them on New Year's Day in the evening at Pepsi Center. How do you see them being able to handle that?
It's hard to believe that one team will win both of those games. Just with the wacky setup, you throw the holiday in it. It's the same team twice. I mean, I was just reading an article yesterday about the BCS championship game, and they interviewed Bobby Bowden, the old coach from, I don't know if that's a grander stage than what we're talking about here, but Bobby Bowden, the old coach from Florida State, they beat Florida in 1996. It was a big win, and then sure enough, the two teams face each other again later in the year in the championship game. And Bowden's like, "Oh my gosh, we already beat these guys," and it's just frustrating. So whoever wins the first game, they're going to have to go right back at it and try to duplicate that success, where the other team now understands the tendencies a little more. I foresee a split, but at the end of the day, the Nuggets and Lakers, they're fun teams to play against each other. The Nuggets feed off the Kobe Bryant grit. You look at guys like Aaron Aflalo playing defense. I'm just excited about this opportunity to watch these games back to back.
We're talking with the Denver Post Nuggets beat writer Benjamin Hochman. I just have a few questions here in this podcast for you. One, I wanted to let you know that I did drop your name to Lakers assistant coach Quinn Snyder, and his eyes lit up. Obviously, I know the background behind that, but explain your connection to Quinn Snyder.
Small world, let me tell you. When I was studying journalism at the University of Missouri, I adore basketball, and I was able to get a job as a student manager, a student assistant, if you will, for the Missouri Tigers team. Coach Snyder was the coach, and he's one of my favorite guys in basketball. He's just got this electric personality. He's so smart. It's in Boston. He's wicked smart. And he's just fun to be around. He's got a good sense of humor. So I really enjoyed my time, kind of being a fly on the wall at those practices, listening to this guy coach the Missouri Tigers. And now, all these years later, I'm writing about the NBA, and he's assistant coach on one of the most legendary teams in the NBA. So I look forward to catching up with Coach Q at the Staples Center.
Yeah, so knowing him pretty well, I mean, what do you think his presence as an assistant coach brings to the Lakers?
Oh, I think he's a great get. I got to know him really well, as I said. I mean, here's a guy who just really thinks outside of the box, who just has so much passion. I know you can say that about most coaches, but I mean, the intensity is just overwhelming. I just think guys like Kobe Bryant, especially competitors, passionate people, will feed off this type of a coach.
Now, another interesting connection to the Lakers. You wrote an article, a while back about Coach Gurge, is what they call him. He's no longer an assistant under George Karl, but there's a connection with Mike Brown with him. When Mike Brown was helping out the Nuggets as a video coordinator, he was kind of his mentor, and you had written in an article about just how much of an influence he had on Brown. To what degree did he help him out in the coaching ranks?
I'll tell you, Mike Brown and I spoke at the All-Star game a few years ago when he was the coach of the Cavaliers, coach in the East. And Coach Tim Gergerich, who most fans don't know of, is a legendary assistant coach in basketball, and he was a George Karl confidant for many years. And then he ended up going to the Dallas Mavericks last year. And Jason Terry said during the NBA Finals, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for Coach Gergerich, or who they call Coach Gerg. And anyway, Mike Brown, again, got to know Coach Gergerich at a young age, and famously in basketball circles, Gergerich hosts a summertime camp for big men in Las Vegas, and it's not one of those like put the spotlight on it, bring the media, bring the TV cameras, all that. It's a quiet, kind of secluded, almost mysterious camp held at a high school gym that no one knows about. It's almost like a speakeasy, if you will. And when Mike Brown was young, Coach Gergerich brought him to the camp and basically just threw him into these drills and made him coach these NBA big men. And Brown just learned so much from Gergerich. And I remember back to my interview with Mike Brown, he said perhaps the most influential coach of his life in his basketball career was Tim Gergerich. And I just thought that was really cool to hear. Because Mike Brown wasn't an NBA player. He didn't have that pedigree. He learned the game from these Yoda-like mentors, and Tim Gergerich is one of the main reasons why the Lakers have Mike Brown as a coach.
Those are the thoughts of the Denver Post Nuggets beat writer Benjamin Hochman. I'm going to leave you with one last question. After this podcast, how quickly do you think Hochmaning will become a trend on Twitter?
I would love for it to happen. I just don't have much faith. I feel like it's too complicated of a thing. With T-boning, you just get on one knee and you pray, boom, you're T-boning. With the aforementioned Hochmaning, the screaming at your laptop wall in an intense moment on deadline, I think it would just scare people more than be a cool thing.